Hello, AP students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have notes for Chapter 8, Emotion and Motivation, and we're going to talk about Part 4, Motivation. So, motivation, that's what makes us act as we do. And part of that is the whole idea of motivation, all the processes that involve starting, directing, and maintaining physical and psychological activities. And there are different types of motivation, and we'll kind of get into some specifics here, but you got to talk about things like drive, which is the biologically instigated motivation. It's all about survival and reproduction. You could talk about motives, that's the internal mechanism that selects and directs behavior, a narrower sense of the motivational process that is learned and not biological. You can also get into talking about some specific types of motivation. Intrinsic motivation, that's the desire to engage in an activity for its own sake rather than for some external consequence, meaning that you're doing something because you love it and you don't need the reward for doing it. Whereas extrinsic motivation, the desire to engage in an activity to achieve some kind of external consequence, you want the reward, you want the sticker. Okay. Other things, you can have conscious motivation. This is having a desire to engage in an activity and being aware of the desire because you are aware that you enjoy or you want to be doing this. And then finally, there is unconscious motivation, having a desire to engage in an activity, but being consciously unaware of the desire. And this is where you might get into things that kind of fall along the line of Freud's theory of psychoanalytic theory, which we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. So, theories of motivation. There's the instinct theory. This is kind of an outdated view, but it's the idea that certain behaviors are completely determined by innate factors, meaning that we're kind of wired in the DNA to do these kind of things. And the reason why we kind of refer to it as it being outdated is because there's flaws to it, because it overlooks the effects of learning. Learning is really important here, but a lot of times when we look at this instinct theory, we look at things like the fixed action patterns, and that might be genetically based behavior that's seen across a lot of species. There's also, there we go. Fixed action patterns has replaced the older notion of the instincts. So you can jot that down. Moving on. Other motivational theories. You could talk about the drive theory. This originated as an alternative to the instinct theory. It is a hypothetical state of energy or tension that moves an organism to meet the biological need, such as animals that need water to drink. And hence you got to get into talking about things like a need, which is the biological imbalance, such as like dehydration, that threatens survival if the need is left unmet. Hence, the biological needs are believed to produce certain drives. Okay, along with that, you've got to talk about homeostasis, which is the body's tendency to maintain a biologically balanced condition, especially with regards to nutrients, water, and temperature. These are things that we always want to kind of keep in balance. Down the line, you got to talk about the cognitive theory. This is also known as the locus of control, which is probably the better name for this. But many of our motives are the result of perception and learning rather than the biological processes. And the man who is kind of attributed to this theory is Julian Rotter. This theory, for the most part, he asserts that the likelihood of our selecting a certain behavior is determined by two factors, and that is the expectation of attaining a goal, meaning that if I'm going to do this and I think I can achieve it, I'm going to probably participate, or the personal value of the goal, what I'm going to get out of this. And for a lot of folks, that kind of leads people to do certain things. Hence, we get into this whole notion of the locus of control. And the locus of control is an individual's sense of where his or her influences originates internally or externally. So if you have an internal locus of control, meaning that it's coming from inside of you, you might use things like a safety belt. You might save money. You might choose to exercise and to eat a healthy diet. Whereas an individual who has an external locus of control looks at factors outside of themselves that might motivate them, like, I'm going to smoke because, I just want to smoke. Maybe I'll buy lottery tickets. Maybe I will engage in some maybe unsavory behavior because they feel like if anything bad is going to happen to them, it's going to be kind of not coming from themselves, but coming from somebody or something outside of them. So needless to say, those are a couple different theories, along with some of the Freudian theories here. We got the psychoanalytic or psychodynamic ideas here that Freud thought that motivation comes mainly from the unconscious mind. Hence, we get into talking about things like the id, maybe the ego, the superego. If you remember, the id is kind of the part of our personality that is always fueled by meeting its pleasures and to having its needs satisfied. Um, Needless to say, you can look at things like eros, which is what Freud talked about as this desire primarily of the id to seek out things like sex, and thanatos, kind of the id's desire for destruction and aggression. All of that is coming from this psychoanalytic point of view. There are other theories of motivation. You could get into talking about Abraham Maslow's humanistic theories, and Maslow believed that we act on our pressuring needs, which occur in the natural hierarchy in order of importance. Hence, the hierarchy of needs, the notion that needs occur with the biological needs being the most basic, and then we move up to safety needs, attachment, or sometimes known as belonging, our esteem, and then finally self-actualization. If you look at Maslow's theory kind of from its origin, it was believed that you had to meet the basic need before you can move to the next need above it. There might be some cases where that might not be really the case today, but he also believed that very few people were ever self-actualized. And he always thought that Abraham Lincoln and Eleanor Roosevelt were kind of the epitome of that. And if you ever do a little historical research, you'll know that both of those individuals were a little bit flawed, in their own personal lives. Rewards versus no rewards. Research studies against rewards. There have been a lot of questions of whether or not people should be getting rewards for doing just ordinary behaviors. And so many experiments have kind of evolved from this. And the experiment example I'm going to give you, in the experimental group, we had a group of people that drew pictures for reward certificates. The control group drew pictures without any expectation of getting a reward. And as a result, the rewarded children were less enthusiastic about drawing than those who hadn't been rewarded. So maybe we're rewarding for the wrong reasons, is kind of what this study is trying to highlight. Over justification, this is the process by which extrinsic or external rewards can sometimes displace the internal motivation, as when a kid receives money for playing video games. You can read a little bit about that in your textbook, but over justification occurs when the reward is given without regard to the quality of performance. Hence this great debate when you talk about little kids who are in Little League who get trophies for just participating, whether or not we're damaging our culture by doing those kind of things. And certainly there's some evidence that's coming out here that's probably telling us we shouldn't be doing some of those things. Anyway, research and support of rewards can be effective if the reward is not given out as a bribe for a job well done. So if a child enjoys playing the piano and is rewarded after freely playing, not being told to play, then this reward might motivate the motivated person even more. Motivating a disinterested employee not by paying raises, but by using impromptu praise or certificate when it is deserved, might make good employees even better. Thank you very much.